Welcome to Discover Joyous Love with Anita DeFrancesco as your host. This is a hybrid of topics under the subjects of mindfulness, sexuality, and relationships. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Discover Joyous Love podcast. I'm your host, Anita DeFrancesco, and today we have a very special guest, and I will get to that in a moment. So I just want you to tune in. Most of my work that we're talking about revolves around love, relationships, psychological work, counseling, healing, emotional work. So this podcast is dedicated to a variety of subjects under that, in the Discover Joyous Love, under that, realm of work there. So today we have Bond Wright with us. Where are you, Bond?
Can you see me?
Yes, today we have Bond Wright with us. This is my guest today, and she has been on the show several times already, and we're going to get involved more in her work, her profession, her talents. This is an educational teach-in about the human psychological process, and today's topic that Bond Wright will be speaking about is Reichian treatment program. Seize your one precious life. So what does that mean? She's going to tell us all about that. But let me give you some background on Bond Wright. She is a fourth-generation Reichian therapist, and this means she was trained by 2 generations away from the first Reichian therapist, Dr. Wilhelm Reich himself. Now, she'll explain to you who he is. He is the creator of Reichian Orgonomy Therapy. And Bond Wright was trained at the California Family Study Center Reichian Training Program for Professionals in Burbank, California. She also was trained by Dr. Henry Hill, an orgonomist. Dr. Hill was trained by Elsworth Baker, and Dr. Baker was trained by Dr. Reich. So Bond Wright was academically educated in California. And she is a trainer and has trained therapists in Los Angeles, around the world, as well as Amsterdam, Denmark, San Francisco, and London, working with them and their client population, developing healing strategies. She was a member of an 18-person therapist training program at the Santa Monica Therapy Center in the 70s. She is a university lecturer and has lectured at various universities and Human Potential Growth Center here and in Europe. She is certified transactional analysis counselor. TA was developed, transactional analysis was developed by Dr. Eric Byrne in Carmel, California. So he is located there in Carmel, and Reverend Bond is an ordained minister with the Association for the Integration of the Whole Person. And she teaches cross-cultural anthropological spirituality. Now, primarily, we're going to talk about the scope of her work. In just a moment, I'll give you this rundown, and then we're going to bring Bond on to take over the show, and she's going to speak about all this. Primarily, the scope of her work includes opening deep, powerful emotions and the somatic life of the body, life management, existential disenchantment, depression and loss, self-realization and identity crisis, addiction and substance abuse, marriage, relationship and conflict resolution, human sexuality, trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder, the creative process as it relates to acting, music, art, writing, and so forth. I would like to welcome Bond Wright to the show here, Discover Joyous Love. Hello, Bond, and welcome back again. How are you?
Hello, Anita DeFrancesco. I am well. I'm very pleased to be here. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today.
So let's start with, how is your program entailed? I would like to know how the program is entailed, what your setup is, your entailed program.
Okay. So first, I want to give a little bit of background about Dr. Wilhelm Reich himself. And our previous program that we arranged, it said, Advance Toward Pleasure, How Pleasure is Critical for Mental Health. And I talked a little bit about what that means. And I want to because pleasure is very important to mental health. And I don't just mean sexuality. I mean pleasure in our work, pleasure in relationships that we have, pleasure in our understanding of our country, our understanding of the world. Pleasure is very important to mental health. If there's no pleasure in the individual's life, they are going to be mentally ill. So I want to address that. Now, Dr. Wilhelm Reich was the creator of what he didn't call it Reichian therapy, he called it orgonomy. The word Reichian was really invented by his followers in the 70s. So orgonomy had to do with, he discovered something, an energy, and it's called different names by different groups of people. India calls it prana, Chinese call it qi, Reifenbach calls it animal magnetism. And so Reich came up with the term orgonomy, and he created a process to treat mental illness using these techniques. He originally, Reich was very young when he lost both his parents. And he was also very young when he went into the military and fought in a war. And then he went to Vienna and he started studying with Sigmund Freud. So he studied psychoanalysis with Sigmund Freud, and he began practicing. He was only about 21 or 22 years old. And he had an office down from Sigmund Freud's office. And Reich began practicing psychoanalysis. And then for one reason or another, he began to do something very different in his practice. Madness was really defined very differently in those days than it is now. And even in the last 10, 12, 15 years, the concept and how it is described of what sanity and insanity is has been changed quite a lot. So we'll call them the olden days, insanity was also very connected to and it was even seen as kind of a moral dilemma. However, Reich, what he discovered when he allowed them to do something that usually was verboten, when he allowed his patients to be very emotional and do what we call today as emotional discharging. And there are 4 basic emotions: anger, pain, fear, and pleasure, and different variations on those 4 basic emotions. When he allowed that to happen and or encouraged it, something astonishing happened. What happened was his patients got better. The exact opposite of what was really encouraged in those days. In those days, even people were chained and put in penal colonies when they were too emotional. Now, there are a lot of things that happen to human beings that cause them to be in extreme episodes of rage or pain or fear, so forth. But Reich, when he allowed his patients to just go right ahead and be very emotional in his office, screaming, crying, hitting pillows, or doing anything like that, this astonishing thing happened, which they got better. So he noticed also something else, that when he encouraged that something happened in their bodies before, they became very energized. So, yes, so he developed a procedure, a process, a treatment that included encouraging breathing and encouraging extreme emotional release. So Reich did deviate from his original training, and that is being a psychoanalyst, which is not an emotional discharge process at all. It's very based on free association, hypnosis, dream examination, so forth. And the results, as we read through the literature, was not very good. So Reich developed his particular approach, Eventually, Reich came to the United States, was under the terrible difficulty of the Second World War. And Reich actually, being Jewish, for one thing, he fled Europe to escape some of the worst things that were going on there. He was going to be pursued, possibly. And he happened to be a person that he very much paid attention to the socio-political phenomena of the day and that zeitgeist. And that is not necessarily true of many Reichian therapists then or even now. But Reich believed that the socio-political zeitgeist in which we live, in which we exist, affects us emotionally, affects us psychologically, and can cause different, like bipolar, PTSD, manic depression, obsessive compulsion, all these different psychiatric analyses that some of these terms weren't even known then, but later became known and codified in the psychiatric nomenclature. So Reich came to the United States, and he was very interested in this whole energy that he called orgone. Later, it was called, in the 70s in our training program, it was called Radex. The Radex, it means the beginning, the number one, the force, you know. And he was treating patients, and he was training therapists. They were called orgonomists. And he was also doing quite a lot of experiments with this orgone. So Reich actually develops this whole process, of which some of us say everything came after Reich. So there are like a lot of different approaches that you might come across, like EMDR or bioenergetics or all these different kinds. They are all offshoots of the original orgonomy practice that Wilhelm Reich designed, created, invented, and perpetrated. So getting a little understanding of him back there. So basically, I treat individuals on several different levels. I treat them somatically, psychologically, spiritually, and sociopolitically. In my opinion, and many of us who were trained in the 70s and 80s, we think that the individual has to be treated and understood from all those different levels, and very much so grounded in one very powerful concept, which is, where are they coming from? What happened to them before that they are in the condition that they are now? So we do a series. My program really consists of, and of course, existentially, existential means, what is the condition of your life? You know, what is the condition of yours? Talked about existential disenchantment. Remember you said that?
Right, right.
Okay, so it really has to do with, how do you feel about your life? How do you feel about the existential condition of your life? So that very much needs to be treated. So I try to break down a lot of these terms into simple language that anyone can understand. I'm not very interested in mystifying all these different categories and scaring people more than they need to be scared already, because I do think that people basically are very scared, you know, generally speaking. And if you go from country to country to country, that's true. As you know, a lot of different bad things are happening in different countries. And as we look at all these populations, we do see that it's safe to say that people generally, their existential condition is one of, they're scared, they're frightened, you know. So my program really consists of treating the individual on all those different levels. Can you hear that noise? That
Sometimes that happens. Just
right.
Whatever. Are you doing anything? It's only happening for a second, so don't worry.
Right. Okay. And they keep thrusting little notices in here. You know, that's what it is. So my program consists of individual work, and also consists of workshop work, because my belief is that one-on-one therapy over a long period of time does not really encourage and or support the individual to make their peaceful way with other human beings. So I always say that what is the best thing for a human being? Can you tell me what that is?
What is the best thing for a human being? Well, I would say love, being accepted,
Close.
um, being, being, you know, accepted is a having an identity.
Another human being, then, isn't it?
So that is the best thing for a human being, another human being.
Exactly.
Is to have that connection, right? To have that experience of the intimacy, whether it's just two people, not necessarily romantic love of any sort, but just two people that are connecting, right? And exercising their emotions and exercising that part of themselves, that what I call aliveness inside, what I call that pleasure that's in your whole body brain, and it's your aliveness and your pleasure that when you connect with another person, it brings joy. That's why my show is called Discover Joyous Love.
Right. Being able to have intimacy with another human being is critical to mental health. If you're not able to have a connection with other human beings, of sharing with them, of being vulnerable and opening yourself to and with them, and also sharing the pleasures and joy of life, then you're mentally ill. So the purpose of making sure that all my clients, when they are ready to go into a group setting, as well as individual work, is very critical to the whole point of them being in therapy, is being empowered. They become the individual that we like to call the self-actualizing person. So Abraham Maslow was a psychotherapist person who created that statement, the self-actualizing person. He's really the only one in the field of psychology that talks about what is mental health. Most everyone else talks about what is pathology, are very, very busy defining pathology. And that doesn't give us a model, an understanding of what mental health looks like. So you can only really get empowered, get your own empowerment, by being associated in a therapeutic process with other human beings. And it also, interestingly, cuts down on transference onto the therapist very powerfully. If you're only doing one-on-one therapy with a therapist, that is our opinion, that you will do a lot of transferring onto that therapist. What is transference? So transference is something that's happened to you in a relationship with someone prior to being in the here and now with someone. So have you ever had the experience that someone will accuse you of this or that or the other? They might even accuse you of being an angel. And that sounds really nice and pleasant for a little while, but that's very hard to live up to that, you know. So, and you say to yourself, I don't recognize myself in that description whatsoever. So what's happening is they are transferring onto you any and all relationships that have happened in the past. So obviously what's come forward immediately is the relationship with parents. So whatever happened in your relationship with parents, unless you have finished it, resolved it, understood it, let go of it, you are going to transfer that on to everyone. Everyone that you meet, your boss, the bus driver, your teacher, your lover, your spouse, your children. So that needs to be worked out, and that can be worked out in group and also supported by individual work. So I'll give you a very, very easy example. Let's say Susan came into the group, and then she came into her private a few days later and said, I'm not going to go back in that group. That woman in there, Anita, She looks just like the girl that beat me up in high school. So I know that she's going to beat me up. So I'm not going to go in there. That is pure transference, because obviously you're not going to beat her up, right? You have no interest. You may not even look at her twice in the group. This woman really believes that you're going to do that. If she is in complete transference, she'll refuse to go back into the group. If she's 75%, it might be possible to get her back into the group and talk a little bit about that. If she can, that means she's mentally healthier, and we can really work with that in a really positive way. Because some people are really not ready for group. Some people are so traumatized by what's been done to them that they can barely pick up the phone and call a therapist. And so I will arrange for them literally to pull their car up to my office at a certain time every week and just sit there for an hour. And that's really all they can do. And I'll go out, I'll speak to them for a little bit, and then I'll go back into my office, and then they leave at the end of the hour. And they 5 or 6 weeks. They just keep showing up. And then the next time I'll have them, are you ready to come up and sit in the waiting room? And they're able to do that. They trust me a little bit more. They're a little bit more, feel a little bit more security about my office, the environment, and so forth. These are people who have been very badly traumatized. I'll give you an example. I had one of my patients whose father used to, we have in Santa Monica cliffs above a road that runs all the way up from, right next to the ocean. He used to take her out there and hang her by her thumbs over the edge and tell her, I'm doing this to you for your own good, or you're such a bad girl. This is extremely traumatic. And so an individual like that, for her to even pick up the phone and call a therapist is a moment of incredible courage, because they are in such total transference that they're transferring onto everything and everybody. They're totally consumed with that trauma. So I treat people, different post-traumatic stress disorders, people that have been war, men that have been in war, individuals that have been sexually molested, people that have been raped, beaten up, etc. So it's very critical for these individuals to eventually show up and be involved in group work. In there, they really learn they can be safe around other people. They learn that they can actually participate in positive relationshiping within the group. And they also see me, other people, the Reichian Therapy Intensive. So I'll talk about that a little bit. So the private work, that is where I actually do quite a lot of
Yes, tell me something about your cases, your private, some of your cases. I know you're speaking of some of them right now, but
yes,
you can elaborate more on that. Share some of your cases, or
okay, I shall. So my program is a combination of individual and group work. And one of the things I do with every client I have, I do what's called the transactional analysis script. So it's a 3-hour session, and I ask them all very specific, very carefully designed script questions about their background, particularly the dynamics in their family. And then from that, I write what we call in transactional analysis, the script matrix. And what this is primarily your basic do's and don'ts in life, what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And once we have the individual matrix, then we can actually design a program that can help them go against that. For instance, the person I just spoke about, her very brutal treatment from her father, definitely gave her a script that said, don't be alive. And so it made it really quite impossible for this woman to go to school, to participate in life in any kind of way, because every time she tried to act like a live human being, she felt, no, you shouldn't be here. There was a voice telling her, you shouldn't be here. Your life is worth nothing and you shouldn't be here. So once we get that established in the individual work, and I get a very clear understanding of where they have been and what's going on in their life, I also lead them and teach them how to work, how to write a therapeutic, we call a therapeutic contract. And the therapeutic contract basically uses transactional analysis, ego states. Now, Freud said id, super id, and ego. And transactional analysis, Eric came along, Eric Byrne, and said, no, I think it's parent, child, and adult. That we have these three ego states, and we are born with these three ego states, parent, adult, and child. In the child is your creativity, your sexuality, and your emotions. In your adult ego state, it's information only. Like right now, I'm in my adult right now. I'm giving a lot of information. And in the, excuse me. So in the parent state, when we're born, it's called a nurturing parent. So every child that's born feels like I'm okay, you're okay, they're okay, everyone's okay. However, what happens based on the level of neuroses in that family, the child takes in that information, and that nurturing parent can turn into a critical parent. So in the case of, let's say, we'll call her Susan, the critical parent was, you're bad, you're not okay, you should not exist, you should be killed. So he had that internalized tape that kept going all the time, all the time. So writing a contract that says something very simple, like take my power in all areas of my life, open my emotions. So it's usually the contract is written from the child and then how the critical parent gets in the way. One of the focuses of therapy is getting rid of that critical parent entirely. Normally, in all the rest of the field of psychology and in the general public, it's called self-hatred. But we don't call it self-hatred. We call it the internalized critical parent. Yeah, and we also call it, and everyone will, they'll put a name on it themselves, and that's okay, you can do that. Some people call it the monster parent. Some people will call it even things that have to do with racial prejudice, like the Nazi parent. It's definitely, yeah, it's definitely. And I have actually treated people that were the children of Holocaust survivors. And many of them do have that kind of critical parent. You're no good, you're Jewish, you're bad, So as I get to know my client better, and we set some definite goals, and they're working in group, and they're also being given, when they're ready, the Reichian Intensive. The Reichian Intensive was created by Wilhelm Reich, and primarily the individual lays on a mat in my office, and then I work with them through the tools and techniques that we have to enable them to open deep, powerful emotion that's there. So if we're successful as we move along, you really learn a lot about yourself. You learn a lot about how you're put together. And usually you come right into what your issue is. Your issues are immediately. Nature is an amazing, amazing creation. It's just amazing. I'll give you an example. A gentleman came into my office and he was wearing a three-piece suit, looked very powerful. He happened to be an attorney. And you would look at him and think, he must be in control of everything. He looks great. He looks like he really knows what he's doing. And you certainly would want him on your side in any kind of legal battle. And you would not want to be on the other side when he was the opposing attorney. So he looked, very very affable, very collected and cool and so forth. So after your initial intake, I gave, let's call him John, an intensive, Reichian therapy intensive. And he started opening a lot of screaming almost immediately, which you would be, if you had never seen this work before, been quite surprised to see a person like him go from there to screaming, you know. But we Reichians, we expect this, you know, and to us it's just, you know, business as usual. So it comes out that he was the child of a first marriage. His mother died and his father remarried, married into a family that didn't want him. And so the men in the family wanted literally to get rid of him. They wanted to kill him, and they were setting about to do that. So one day they invited him into the cellar where there was a swing. They had put up a swing, and they were pushing him in this swing, and they were pushing him so hard that his head hit the ceiling. And they were hoping that that was going to do away with his life. But he started screaming so much, and his grandmother heard it. She came running down the stairs, and they rushed him to the hospital. So he was treated somatically, physically for that, but he was never treated psychologically. This is a horrendously traumatic experience for a little boy, for a child. So during that very first session, the very first Reichian intensive, he began screaming the screams that happened back there in the cellar when he was 7 or 8 years old, that were locked into his body. And then through my counseling and direction, was able through a series of intensives to work through that trauma until he was no longer PTSD. He was no longer traumatized. So what effect did that have in his life? His life opened really like a flower. Things that people like him are very vigilant. They're very controlling. They're very watchful. They keep their life decisions very controlled, very small. They don't venture a lot. They don't take risks. And now that that was no longer an issue for him, he was able to really change some of the staff that really were not too good in his law office for new and better ones. He was even able to merge with a larger legal firm. He even came in, would say that he made friends with the opposing attorneys in the courtroom. So generally his life, his existential condition changed. And he indeed was able to advance toward pleasure in all kinds of ways. This person is now a self-actualizing person. So I can tell you, you know, like that bring that about. Now I also do something that's called the residential. The residential is often taken by people that are out of state or out of country. They're from Philadelphia, or they're from Amsterdam, or a lot of different places. And they fly in and they stay at a nearby bed and breakfast here. And they have an intensive, 1 or 2 intensives every day for a week, sometimes for 2 weeks, or sometimes even 3 weeks. And these are people that there's no Reichian therapy available in wherever they are, and or they've heard about me and they want to come and they want to work with me. So I had a case where I had an individual, a fairly well-known rock and roll guitarist, and he was seeing a chiropractor, and he kept having a lot of difficulty with his back. So when you have that much emotions in your body that you have never expressed, it will take the form of all kinds of psychosomatic disorders. You'll have your waist is always hurting, or you get rashes on your legs, or unexplainable things are happening in your spinal column, or you're having atrial fibrillation with your heart. It's diagnosed as that, but it's just really connected to the trauma you're carrying with you. So there are all these psychosomatic things that happen. So he came in and his complaint was, I don't feel like performing anymore. I can't stand my music. The chiropractor who sent me said she can't do anything more for me, that you need to go to this Reichian therapist. I can't write songs anymore. I hate my guitar. I hate rock and roll, and I want to kill myself. I just want to end it all. Can you help me? So I said, well, we'll see. So I can't really say, yes, I can help you. I think I can. Usually I can, you know. But sometimes an individual doesn't have the spiritual courage to face themselves. So in this kind of work, it takes a lot of spiritual courage. And that's also where how I teach spirituality. And I use cross-cultural references to do it. When I say spirituality, I don't mean Muslimism or Judaism or Christianity. I mean mostly the wisdom of indigenous cultures the world over that have come up with, they've created a very creative spirituality. So courage is very much needed. This is not just sit and chat, you know, in the consulting office. You can do that forever and it'll work to a point, but it's not going to work. Like John, for instance, that's not going to work for him. And it's not going to work for my rock and roll client either. So we began 2 sessions a day. He was here for 2 weeks. And then finally he'll start coming in the second session, second week, and saying, well, I think I've made a decision that I'm willing to stay alive. I'm willing to stay alive. I'm not thinking about killing myself anymore. So, of course, to me, you know, I'm saying to myself, yeah, of course, I know. I know. It's some real help. And that's really what anybody needs, is some real help. That's not easy to get, you know, not at all. You know, there are people that spend years and years in therapy and thousands of dollars and get nowhere. You know, in my opinion, that's really a tragedy. And it happens so much.
What is the reality percentage rate of seize your one precious life? What is the reality percentage rate of that, seizing your one precious life?
Oh, John did seize his one precious life, didn't he?
So what is the reality of the percentage of that, of your clients, your patients? I mean, are they all going to be like John?
My answer for you is, if they persist in the program, if they continue, if they can take counseling suggestion and do the things I recommend, if they are able to get somewhat beyond their transference and get more into the here and now, all those ifs, and they have the financial ability to do so. If they have all those things, then it's very high. It's up in the 90s. It's very high.
Okay.
Yes. So, however, I'll give you a very simple example. I have a young man that is basically an escapee from one of the major religions, and he did not fit into that religion. He happens to be a gay person, and that's very verboten in that particular religion. And a very simple thing, I do ask them about their creativity. You know, do you write poetry? Have you ever written poetry? Do you write stories? Have you ever played an instrument of any kind? Any of those creative abilities. So he's, well, I used to play trumpet in high school. So I gave him homework to storage and start playing again. That he is a person that really isolates quite a lot. The horn, playing an instrument, is a connection to the entire world. He can go with that horn anywhere. He can go play in a church. He can He can play little gigs with other bands. It is an avenue to get him to do that. And he has started to, I even had him bring it into the group one night and do like a 5-minute little piece for us. And he's totally thrilled. And it is really enabling him to feel empowered. So his chances of becoming a more empowered individual are very high. So let's talk about another person, a woman this time. She was, when the Japanese bombed Singapore, there was a big population there during the Second World War of Dutch, American, Australian, and British people living in Singapore. And some of them were able, ships were able to come in and get them out of there. Some of them did escape, did get out. They made a film about it called Paradise Road. Patricia Arquette was in, no, Patricia Arquette? No, not Patricia Arquette. I forget the name of the actress. I'll remember later. So one of my patients, she fled and she got on a ship. She was Dutch and she got on a ship of Dutch and British people. Unfortunately, out to sea, the Japanese fleet came in and bombed the ship. So many of the women were lost, but some of them managed to get to shore. And of course, they're in shock and they walked through the jungle and started walking on the road, which was not the smartest thing to do. They should have kept hidden in the jungle, right? So the Japanese troops came with their jeeps, saw them, picked them up, and took them to a concentration camp, a prisoner of war camp. She was only 3 years old when this happened. She was with her mother. And they were incarcerated there for about 2 years. And my client, those very formative years, experienced watching a lot of cruelty in that camp. And being in that kind of learning that you're a prisoner, like you have no rights, you're in danger all the time, you know. So a very frightening incident happened one day in particular. They would not feed the women unless they sent one woman out to ask for the food. The problem with that, and they decided to draw straws who would be sent out. And the women, of course, would all try to avoid it because when they went out, the Japanese had this habit of beating them for asking for the food, and sometimes even ending their lives. So her mother had picked the straw. It was her turn to go out. And children love their parents and love their mothers, and they want to help. I know you remember that probably as a little girl yourself, you know. You'd see mom or dad having a problem and you'd say, I can help, let me help you. You know? So we're born as children very generous. We're generous with ourselves, we're generous with our love. We have to learn to stop doing that. And Reich did quite a lot of writing about what happens in the child that causes the child to go from a loving little being into someone who nowadays would be called narcissistic or selfish or, you know, all the. So she ran ahead of her mother and ran ahead to the Japanese officer to ask for the food. What an incredible act of courage and love of this little girl. Fortunately, that Japanese soldier, since the commanding officer was not around, you know, a lot of these Japanese soldiers were not quite so brutal as they're always portrayed. They're under more authoritarian rule themselves. And they either have to follow those orders, no matter how bad they are, or get hurt themselves. So if you're in that terrible existential position, some of them did choose to be hurt themselves rather than hurt another person. Some of them wanted to live so badly, and usually they're always very young. You know, they put you in service when you're 17, 18 years old. You're old babies, and you're big adults. That's what you are.
They have to take the orders. They take the orders, you know.
Exactly.
They're under control themselves. Eventually, they're going to be with the transference.
Totally. And maybe live their whole life that way. So my little, we'll call her Fee, she went out, she did get the food, she did bring it back, and it was very traumatic for her, not as bad as it could have been. But during an intensive in the group, she had left that camp. They were liberated. She was about 5 or 6, many years before, but she had not left psychologically. She had left physically, but not psychologically. So here is an exact example of whatever happens with children in their families. They leave, they can be out in the world like John, went through law school, practicing law, having a lot of trouble doing that, but nevertheless doing. He still lives with those 2 uncles in the cellar. So that is the quintessential drama of what therapy is all about, is enabling to complete and work through whatever it was that happened to them before. And so she did during an intensive. She literally flew out of that camp. She flew out psychologically and spiritually. How, that must sound like an incredible thing to you, listening to that, To someone like me, I'm kind of used to it. I wasn't when I was a student. When I was a student, I was like, what? I was like everyone else. No, that doesn't happen. I can't imagine it.
I just want to say we have 10 more minutes left. To the audience, you're listening to Discover Joyous Love. I'm your host, Anita DeFrancesco, and my guest today is Bond Wright. And we're going to take about 10 more minutes and wrap up the show. So if you want to focus on something different right now, Bond Wright, something, or you want to continue on what you're talking about right now.
So to just sum it up with Fee will never be a fully functioning person. Those early years were much too traumatic at very formative years. However, she's not in an institution. She lives, in Holland. And it came out in her work that she's quite an extraordinary illustrative artist. So I encouraged her to go with that. And she was at that time became one of the major graphic designers of all the science books in that country because of her ability. So she lives, in her own apartment, her own house there, not incarcerated, not rather institutionalized, a reasonable life. Whereas if this program, she had not been in this program, she would have been definitely institutionalized, probably passed away early. So her one precious life, all these people, everyone wants to live their one precious life. They don't even know necessarily that it is their life, or that it's even precious, or that it's even worth saving, any of those kinds of things. This program teaches people that it is your one precious life, and this is how to get it. This is how to get control of your precious, to expect that you will have a life, even that it is your birthright, and that this is how you go about it, and you can have the rest of your life in a much higher quality life that also includes the pleasure of work, the pleasure of sexuality, the pleasure of relationships, the pleasure of being creative and whatever. And creativity is very important. Human beings are born creative. We are extremely intelligent, creative beings. So how do we cure mental illness? By all the things I just talked about. Anyone going on drugs is not going to do this. It's not going to do this. Maybe temporarily for a little while to go on Prozac or Zoloft. I don't prescription. I'm not legally able to anyway. I don't want to. And for a short period of time. So this program teaches people you have a precious life and this is how to gain it. So do you know of anyone yourself that was in this program that you might give a little testimonial about that?
You mean myself or? Well, you've done a lot of work on me. So I have always had the psychological I guess a resiliency that my life is precious, and he said we all have a different strength in us. And some people, they're so traumatized that they don't know where to draw that strength. They may not have role models, or sometimes your parents are not your role models, but you may meet someone in life. And when that person comes along, it might be the blessing to find a strong person that just walks into your life and is your savior for that short time, whether it be a year or a few months. And I was pretty, I won't say lucky, but I was pretty gifted in that way to have certain people come into my life to sort of let me realize I have resiliency, I have strength, and that I am able to have a precious life. So being one of my experiences when I was very sick as a child with rheumatic fever, I almost died. And that's where I was able to hold on to that life was a gift. And
Yes.
but then with all the work you did with me, all the traumatic experiences I've had with the parents not being there and the physical violence, and
Yeah.
it was kind of like I was able to see both sides. And with your help and expertise, I have become a transformed individual, along with a lot of other practices that I do out there. But I drew on my strength and the role models that were introduced to me as gifts from the universe, and you were one of them.
Thank you very much. So you have seized your one precious life as compared to what could have happened with you. So you have. Now, there's another aspect to this program as we close. Not everyone is traumatized that comes into my clinic to work. Sometimes it's just families that they're overrun with banality. It's just the humdrum of my life is humdrum. I don't seem to be able to rally myself. I haven't really had any particular traumas, but I don't really feel my emotions. I'm not really connected to my body. I feel like I'm in my head all the time, right? Okay. So that individual, this program is also designed for them as well, not just people that are traumatic. And so that's great. How do people contact me?
Yes, tell us how can folks contact you? Where can we call you, reach you? And we're about to close the program out now. You've been listening to Discover Joyous Love. I'm your host, Anita DeFrancesco. My guest has been Bond Wright, and our topic is Reichian treatment program. Seize your one precious life. Bond, how can we reach you? How can my audience get in touch with you?
Right, you can call me at 310-450-3396. 310-450-3396. You can also email me at my name, Bond, B-O-N-D, Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T, @gmail.com. You can go to my website, which is rightbodymind.com, and look at my website. And I also like to receive letters, good old-fashioned letters. You can write me a letter and tell me what's going on with you. Ask me a question. I'm very open to answering a question if it's, at all practical and, proper. So there you have it. Thank you so much, Anita, for creating. This is part of your seizing your one precious life. You created this program. See, you're very, very clever, resourceful, and talented.
Right. So Discover Joyous Love means that I can actually now, with all of the Reichian program work treatment that I've had, to be able to connect intimately with individuals out there, anyone, to know that I have these feelings. So it's honoring the feelings. And part of the feelings is discovering the love inside. So as a result, maybe that's why I came up with this type of show.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, you're certainly gifting everyone by doing this. So thank you very much. I do enjoy working with you. This is our second show.
Yep. And this is our third, I think. Oh, this is the third. This is our third part.
Right.
So this is part 3 that we're doing today.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, very
Well,
good.
Well,
So,
thank you, Bon, for all your knowledge, your expertise, and my audience is going to be very this is going to be a very enlightening podcast for people to tune into. I want to thank you. Okay. Thank you
take
very
care. Goodbye, everyone. Be safe and seize your one precious life.